Yes, Ms. Denis.
Thank you, Your Honour. Archbishop, before we adjourned, I was asking you questions in relation to the civil litigation that the Fosters, took against various church identities. Now, you set out in paragraph 170 and thereafter the settlement discussions, and perhaps we can have that on the screen. And at paragraph 170, you indicate that, to the best of your recollection, you gave essentially one instruction: to try to resolve the claims as fairly, compassionately and early as possible. It's nearly on the screen now. Were you engaged with any discussions with others in the church or your lawyers as to any limit below which you were instructed the matter should settle? That is, limit as to...
No, money? I left that to my people to determine.
And none of your people had any discussions with you about what the settlement range might be?
No.
And when you say you left it to your people, who in particular?
That would be to the business manager in conjunction with my lawyer, but mainly the business manager would be the person acting from the Archdiocese.
And where did the business manager get his instructions from as to what amounts of money he might discuss with the lawyer?
I think it was left to him in conjunction with the lawyer to determine, recognising the situation and recognising the great suffering, to do what could be done to settle it reasonably. And there was no figure. I didn't enunciate a figure or say within this bracket or anything like that.
Do you now recall whether Catholic Church Insurance were involved in discussions as to a settlement figure or range?
Not to my knowledge.
When you were told that the amount offered was $750,000 plus legal costs, what was your view of that amount?
I felt that, as far as I knew, the matter had been worked through seriously and logically, and I was satisfied that an agreement had been reached.
Did it cause you to reflect upon the amount that had been initially offered to Emma as part of the Melbourne response?
I was deeply conscious of how much the Fosters and how much Emma had suffered, and I believed that it was the Fosters' right, if what was offered by the church path was not adequate, to take the path that they had taken.
Did it cause you to think again about the cap that had been placed on the Melbourne response?
Not at that time, no.
Now, a key component of the Melbourne response was that the counselling and other treatment services offered by CareLink continued for as long as they were needed with respect to primary victims. That's right. And as Ms Sharkey told us yesterday, that essentially became the same rule of thumb in relation to secondary victims.
Yes.
Now, as part of the settlement with the Fosters, the amount of $750,000 was determined to cover all future needs of a medical and counselling nature. You understood that?
Yes, I do.
Did you have any discussions with your business manager or any other of your people involved about whether or not the settlement should permit the Fosters to continue their association with CareLink?
No, I did not.
Now, looking back now on that decision, Archbishop, what do you say about it?
I haven't reflected on that issue because I felt that the matter, we were very anxious that the matter would be resolved in a way which would be balanced and take into account all of the aspects. And when I say the aspects, you can't regard people as aspects. To take into account the needs of the Fosters and to feel that they were adequately met. I would have understood that in the negotiation that point was arrived at. Had matters been further represented, I know later, of course, that we did meet, if I'm not mistaken, that we did meet the legal fees of the Fosters as well.
Well, that was part of the settlement,
That's
wasn't
right, yes. So I came to the general impression that the matter was resolved as equitably as possible. I think that's where I rested at that point of time.
So it's the case that if a person chooses to deal with the church outside of the Melbourne response by way of litigation, no aspect of the Melbourne response, in particular I'm referring to the CareLink aspect, remains available to them.
That was negotiated in that particular case. I'd need to take advice on what might be negotiated in other cases.
As part of the review that you've initiated and gave evidence about yesterday, is the operation of CareLink part of that?
The terms that I mentioned yesterday refer to any matters resulting from the new compensation arrangements which affected the functioning of the Melbourne response. So certainly those matters could be included.
Well, are they included, Archbishop?
Well,
so they could be, I'm asking whether...
They could be. I think I'd have to leave it to Mr Ryan as to what he would choose to recommend. That the terms that we've expressed and that I read out yesterday were questions relating to the amount of compensation, and then I think it goes on to say, and other matters referring to the functioning of the Independent Commissioner, the Compensation Panel or CareLink. So I think those matters could be within the remit.
Well, looking now at your intention in respect of the review, is it your intention that the review covers the operations of CareLink?
Inasmuch as it's related to what is awarded and therefore what benefits are given, yes.
So only insofar as it's tied to compensation arrangements and the work of the Independent Commissioner, is that right?
That's the way I understand it at present, and I must stress that I haven't finalised the whole matter with Mr Ryan yet.
But do you have a view, leaving aside Mr Ryan, do you have a view as to whether or not the operations of CareLink should be the subject of a review?
I would want to be compassionate in what is awarded, and therefore if the indication is that the operation of CareLink needs some further tweaking, I'd certainly be open to that.
Yes, your answer refers to the indication to you, that is, whether or not the reviewer thinks so. What I'm asking you is your view, independent of the reviewer. Do you want CareLink to be reviewed as part of this or some other review?
I would need to be convinced that that is needed.
And you're not currently convinced?
Not at this moment.
Thank you. Now, can we turn to paragraph 179 of your statement? This is in relation to O'Donnell. Now, you indicate in that paragraph that you looked at the records to identify the dates on which disciplinary action was taken against him. Now, you don't refer to, in those paragraphs, the 1958 complaint that was made. You understand what I'm talking about in respect of that complaint, Archbishop?
I have, since going through the documentation, I've been aware that there is a complaint, and I have no difficulty about it, I must stress. There is a complaint that was made by a scoutmaster relating to an offence in Dandenong to the then Monsignor Moran, later Bishop Moran, who died in 1970.
Now, you understand that your lawyer, Mr Leader, gave evidence in respect of what his investigations revealed concerning that earlier complaint?
Only in more recently, yes.
Yes, he gave evidence last week about it.
That's right.
And part of his evidence was that he accepted that the documents he had reviewed established that the church had knowledge which may indicate that it should have acted and done something about O'Donnell from 1958. Do you understand that to be the effect of his evidence?
I would certainly say that.
You accept his evidence?
I accept his evidence, yes.
Now, if that's the case, then Monsignor Moran's position becomes relevant. What do you understand from the work you did to compile paragraphs 179 and ongoing of your statement about Mr. or Monsignor Moran's position?
I know that Bishop Moran was the Vicar General. In those days, Archbishop Mannix, and I won't go into a long discussion, Archbishop Mannix had a priest who was administrator of the cathedral and also Vicar General, everything rolled into one.
I see.
And he would be the person to whom those sort of complaints would have been made. Archbishop Mannix was elderly, 1958, he died in 1963, so he would have been in his 90s. And Moran, of course, was carrying the weight of the administration.
So Moran was a bishop, was he?
He became a bishop in 1964 in India. He was consecrated by Pope Paul VI.
So in 1958, when he was Vicar General, that complaint came to his attention. That's right?
From Mr. Leader's evidence, I understand that. I think we don't seem to have any record of what he said and what he did, and that's the thing that limps as far as we are concerned.
But you accept that whatever he said or did not affect O'Donnell becoming a parish priest at Oakley in 1976.
Absolutely.
And staying in that position till 1992.
Yep.
And he was in that position notwithstanding that the Vicar General, who subsequently became a bishop, was aware of a significant complaint against him.
Well, Moran had died in 1970, and the question in my mind, and I'm not trying to make it more difficult for people, but the question in my mind is whether he told anyone, what did he do about it? I can't approve if there's a complaint being made and no action taken. I can't approve of that.
Well, when you say the question in your mind is whether he told anyone and what he did about it,
yes.
Whatever he said or did not prevent Father O'Donnell being appointed a parish priest in 1969 at Hastings, did it?
Correct, correct.
And then, as I said, didn't prevent him being the parish priest at Oakley in 1976.
Correct.
Now, coming back to your statement and turning to paragraph 180, which is on the screen, there was a complaint in November 1992 that O'Donnell had sexually abused a child in the late 50s to early 60s, and his diocesan faculties were withdrawn on the 28th of July 1993. Do you see that?
Correct.
So we might have tab 76 on the screen. We can just scroll up. What's referred to there is that in a letter to him, you do not have any faculties or priestly ministry in the Archdiocese of Melbourne at the present time. Now, just stopping there, in terms of the 4 actions we discussed yesterday, that is the second least serious action, that is the withdrawal of faculties, is that right?
Yes, but with the reference of at the present time, I think we have to remember that a complaint had been made. I think the records show that on the 6th of May 1994, O'Donnell was charged.
Yes. Yes, this is prior to his charge. I'm just trying to understand,
yes.
Given our discussion yesterday, Archbishop, where in the line of actions available the action in respect of Father O'Donnell sits. So it is in relation to the withdrawal of faculties.
That's correct.
That's right. And that was available to the Archbishop without regard to Rome.
That's right.
Thank you. And that's signed by the then Vicar General.
Correct.
Now, as you've indicated, in May 1994 he was charged with indecent assaults and subsequently further charges were added. And then in August 1995 he was sentenced to 39 months imprisonment and was released on parole on the 2nd of November 1996. Now, after he was charged, no further action was taken against him?
He was not in a parish, not undertaking any ministry, and he didn't have any faculties.
The penal precept which you've indicated was the next available action, that was not initiated against him?
Not as far as I know.
Now, in August 1995, by that time it was clear that he'd been convicted. That's right?
Correct.
Now, was any action taken against him of a more serious nature, that is, penal precept or the process of laicization begun?
Well, he'd been imprisoned, I think, at that time, and he remained in prison until, with remissions, I think, until November 1996.
Well, what's the relevance of him being in prison as to whether or... Just let me finish, Archbishop.
As we explained, prior to 2000...
Perhaps if I could just finish my question, if you don't mind, Archbishop. What is the relevance of him being in prison to the Church taking action in respect of a penal precept or laicization?
If a person is in prison, you can't get a laicization because prior to 2001, as we heard earlier, a person could not be laicized without him signing the application, and that's considerably difficult, we've found, when a person is in prison.
Mm-hmm. What about the penal precept?
Well, I think the judgment would have been made, and again, this is 1995 and 1996, the judgment would have been made that in fact he is restricted in where he lives, he is restricted in those he has contact with, he is very much supervised. So I think the acceptance would have been to leave things as they were at that time.
Now, when he was released on the 2nd of November 1996, you had taken over as Vicar General by that time?
Correct.
And it was within your responsibility at that time to make decisions and make recommendations to the Archbishop in relation to the discipline of priests, particularly arising out of child sexual abuse?
It was the Archbishop's decision as to what he would do. I would certainly... that was very early in our time. We were trying to address this awful blight, and I think O'Donnell was very frail, and he actually died 5 months later. And I think in the course of the number of things that we had on the agenda, that didn't happen.
So you didn't advise the Archbishop to seek a penal precept in relation to O'Donnell?
I think I'd only been in the job a couple of months, and we were really trying to catch up on what needed to be done.
The answer is no.
No.
Now, he was a pastor emeritus, was he not, O'Donnell?
I think that Archbishop Little, there's a letter from Archbishop Little in May of 1993 and said that his retirement would take effect as from after his Jubilee, which was late in July, before the 28th of July, when his faculties were withdrawn. I think the letter probably used the customary title without making the distinctions. In my time, I've only appointed pastor emeritus those who don't have things against them. In other words, if there's a complaint, they simply are allowed to retire, but without that title. And I think that would have been better had that been done with regard to O'Donnell for obvious reasons.
But in fact it wasn't, and he died as a pastor emeritus.
That's right, yeah. It has no other effect other than a title. But I can see what that says to people, and I apologise for that.
Can I now turn to paragraph 188 of your statement? And this is in relation to Glennon.
Yes.
Now, he was charged with indecent assault on the 15th of April 1978 and was placed on administrative leave from that time. That's right?
Correct.
Now, in late June, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. That's right?
Correct.
And was released on parole in 79 and not given any other appointment as a priest in the Archdiocese.
Nor did he exercise any priestly ministry, whatever, with the approval of the Church.
I take it that his faculties were not withdrawn after his pleading guilty and conviction?
They were, in fact, yes.
They were they?
Yeah.
They were withdrawn on or about the time he pleaded guilty, were they?
Correct.
Perhaps if we can have tab 262 on the screen. Now, this is under Glennon's hand in March 1984, tendering his resignation as an incardinated priest and indicating that he wished to apply formally for the laicization process. That's right?
That's what he said at that time, yes.
It is indeed. Now, there's no document which the Royal Commission has so far located indicating that his faculties were withdrawn. Is there a document that you can refer us to, Archbishop, which records that?
No, I don't know of any document apart from what has already been tendered.
So on what basis do you indicate that he had his faculties withdrawn?
I think it's been part of my knowledge from working, as we saw in 1984 and 1990, to present his case for laicization, that was the knowledge that was possessed.
You don't set it out in paragraph 188 or 189, do you?
No, I don't think I do.
In paragraph 190, you refer to his faculties being withdrawn in March 1984. Do you see that?
I think that was a further, more formal thing. At that time, my memory, and again, I was only in the periphery a bit, at that time, from my memory, is that if a person was charged, they were placed on administrative leave and could not exercise their faculties. And the 1984 decision was to indicate very clearly that they were permanently withdrawn, and the permanence is the point there.
So perhaps if we can have 263 on the screen. So this is the response to Glennon in March 1984, and suggesting that he ring to make an appointment to discuss the process of laicization. Who signed that letter? Can you help us with that?
I would suggest that that was the then Monsignor Peter Connors, the Vicar General.
Thank you. And then 264, a couple of weeks later, the then Archbishop writes, and if we can scroll up that letter, and says that because of this explicit statement of your resignation, I hereby withdraw your faculties. So that's what you refer to in paragraph 190 of your statement.
That's correct.
It then goes on to say, however, this does not deprive you of the provision of Canon 976 of the Code of Canon Law. Can you help us with that? Canon
976 allows a priest who doesn't have jurisdiction in a particular place or faculties to absolve a person in danger of death or to anoint them. In other words, it's the good of souls allows even that possibility.
Thank you. Now, if we can go back to your statement, you say in paragraph 190 that you were asked by Archbishop Little to assist in the preparation of a petition for laicization, and you worked on that petition with a canon lawyer, and that was sent off to the Holy See in November 1990 but was unsuccessful. Now, the period of time between 84 and 90, was that a period of time that it took to put together that petition?
I would say that, you know, there was quite a time spent in reflecting on what the possibilities were. The point for consulting Father Harmon is that he was very well read on what the practice of the Roman congregations were and how, and it was very difficult to discover a case where a particular bishop had applied for a laicization of a priest. My memory is that Glennon wrote in 84, then we would have drafted a petition for him which he refused to sign. And therefore we were looking at what possibilities there were of the bishop being the petitioner, and finally we tried to take note of one or two cases only that we got to know of through canonical literature for the Archbishop to petition.
Now, did you understand from the response you received from the Holy See the reasoning process it followed in determining that the petition be unsuccessful?
Not in detail, no.
Well, in any way?
I'd have to say not in any way.
Well, perhaps you can help us with what you did understand, even if it wasn't in detail.
It's a long time ago now. We would normally have indicated the whole question of his history, the whole question of his offences, his relations with people, which caused so much hurt, the fact that he had said he wanted to apply for laicization, and any other factors to do with his background. And we would have done some other interviews of people who knew him to try and corroborate the picture that we were presenting.
I understand your answer in respect of what you did, Archbishop. Yeah. My question is in respect of the reasoning process of the Holy See in saying no.
I think the problem for the Holy See in saying no was that he'd refused to petition himself. He said he was going to, and then he refused. And
the fact that he refused, as you understood it, was sufficient for the Holy See to say no?
I would say that the attitude of the Congregation for the Clergy at that time was, as I said yesterday, very much to be sensitive to the particular priest rather than what the bishop was trying to do.
Now, the petition for laicization was renewed in September 1994, and can I show you a bundle of documents in relation to that? Perhaps if we can...
Just while we're finding those, Archbishop, who comprised the Congregation for the Clergy? Who were its members?
The Roman congregations have a cardinal prefect and an archbishop who's a secretary. They'd have an under-secretary and officials, and when documents go to a congregation of that type, normally they have 2 or 3 officials which examine the case or the request and make recommendation, which is then studied by what we call the plenaria or the ordinaria. Now, the plenaria is the list of all of the cardinals and bishops who are members of the congregation who meet from time to time. The ordinaria is the fortnightly meeting of those cardinals and bishops together with the secretary and under-secretary who are in Rome. And the documentation is examined, recommendations are made, and then it is passed up to the ordinaria, which is the ordinary meeting of the congregation, for a decision, and a response would come back normally from the secretary.
Well, who are the ordinaria?
The ordinaria would be the prefect, the cardinals who are resident in Rome, the secretary, and the under-secretary and officials would attend upon them.
So when you say the cardinals who are resident in Rome, you mean the cardinals of...
Well, if I may give you an example, I'm a member of the Congregation for Eastern Churches, but of course I'll be meeting in Rome when I'm invited. But the Congregation for Eastern Churches, as indeed the Congregation for the Clergy, meets at regular intervals fortnightly, and therefore those who are members of that congregation who've been appointed by the Pope, let's say there are about 10 cardinals and half a dozen archbishops, well, some of those who happen to be in Rome meet each fortnight to carry on the ordinary business.
So there's a constant group who in fact control the decision-making process. Is that the way?
Or the recommendation, yes.
Well, the decision-making process being a decision to recommend to the Pope. Is that...
Thank you. Yes.
Is that the way it works?
Correct.
So we should understand that for any of these congregations, there may be a group of 10 or 15 cardinals and archbishops who in fact are the dominant force in the decision-making process. Is that the way it works?
They're certainly there most of the time.
Right. And these clerics, would they be Italian in the main?
They'd have various types of experience. People are appointed to congregations because of their broad experience. Normally they would rely on the experts and the canonists who are among the officials of the congregation, for an expert opinion. But it would go to the group.
But the constant that forms the decision-making process on a regular basis, are they Italian?
Not specifically canonists, no.
But are they Italian?
Not necessarily now, since Pope Paul VI reformed the Curia.
Right. So you could end up, for example, anyone could end up being appointed.
I prefer to say anyone could end up.
Well, anyone of appropriate ability and status could end up being appointed.
That's right.
Permanently to Rome, to that body. Is that right?
That's right.
Just turning to the first document in the bundle you've been handed, Archbishop, and perhaps if we can have that on the screen. This is a letter dated the 6th of December 1994 from the then Archbishop of Melbourne to the Vatican in relation to Glennon. And I take it you would have seen this at some stage.
I have seen that.
And in the second paragraph, the Archbishop indicates that there is abundant evidence of Michael Glennon baptising into the Christian Church, administering the sacrament of confirmation to adult converts, celebrating Mass publicly, hearing sacramental confessions, despite the fact that all his priestly faculties have been removed by me, including his permission to celebrate Mass even privately. So I take it from that in 1994, some decade after the faculties of Glennon were withdrawn, he was nevertheless using those faculties.
Yes, and I think the reason for the sending of the case in '94 was that this new dimension had emerged, and he'd been doing it contumaciously for quite some time, and Archbishop Little felt impelled to bring this matter, as well as the imprisonment and the sexual abuse, to bring that to the notice of the Holy See, in the hope that that would act as a compelling cause.
So there was nothing the Archbishop could do himself in respect of Glennon administering and baptising as set out in this letter, notwithstanding he had taken away his powers to do so.
Well, he wouldn't have done so in Catholic churches. He had a camp, if I remember, up at Glen, and he sort of floated around among a group of people, conferring sacraments, being their priest.
I see. So just turning to the second page of this letter, the Archbishop continues to indicate that he had been named a defendant in a number of cases before the civil courts, and the fact that he is still a priest incardinated in the Archdiocese is very difficult for the Archbishop to explain to the enemies of the Church and to the general public. You see that?
I do.
And that wasn't successful either, was it?
Well, I don't want to anticipate what you want to ask me, but there was a second letter.
But that application in 1994 wasn't successful, was it?
No.
And then in 1995, you received the response.
Well, you'll notice that the first letter went in the 6th of December 94. Then on the 10th of January 1995, Cardinal Sanchez and Archbishop Sepe, as he then was, wrote saying, he's an apostate, a heretic, a schismatic. Let the diocesan tribunal do it.
Can I stop you there? If we could just scroll up with that letter.
Yep.
You were told that it would seem that Canon 1364 regarding an apostate from the faith, a heretic or a schismatic, would apply to Father Glennon. Is that in relation to him having exercised his faculties without properly...
Saying I'm a priest, but when he's not in communion with the Church.
So suggesting to you that there be a diocesan tribunal established.
Yes.
And that's a precursor to laicization, or separate from the laicization that you were seeking from the Holy See?
I think they were wanting the solemn, the setting up of a diocesan tribunal, with 3 judges with doctorates in canon law, with all of the procedures that were required to hold a formal trial. And one of the problems that we've had for a long time in this country is the scarcity of sufficiently qualified people who had doctorates, and the whole difficulty to hold a trial with objective judgment and objective consideration of evidence in the area, particularly where all of this other matter about sexual abuse and courts, a person like Glennon has to have a fair trial, and I think the judgment was made by our tribunal personnel advising the Archbishop, and I wasn't part of that, was that really we lacked the ability to give the person a fair trial by that procedure in the local diocese.
By fair trial, you mean fair trial in a canonical sense, not obviously in a criminal sense.
Oh, that's right, in a canonical
because he had received.
That's right. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now then, just turning to the next letter, that was a response by the Archbishop indicating that he'd asked the judicial vicar to take the appropriate steps. And then the final letter is a detailed letter to Mr. Michael Casey from the Reverend Francis Harmon, setting out all of the various difficulties involved in doing what the Holy See had suggested.
That's correct. You'll notice that this is December 1997, so Archbishop Pell is the Archbishop, and Michael Casey was by that time his secretary in Melbourne, as he later was in Sydney.
And as a result, in May 1998, Archbishop Pell made a further application, and this time to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and a year later, in May 1999, Pope John Paul II issued a decree, and that can be found behind tab 265. Now, are you able to help us with the reasoning process in 1999, whereby the then Pope issued a decree in circumstances where previously it had been rejected on more than one occasion?
All I can understand is that the transferal of the request to the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith, which I can only presume was very much more alert, the Congregation for Doctrine has a higher status than the other Roman congregations, and while it wasn't an appeal process, they consider very carefully those doctrinal issues, such as the matters given in his performing as a priest without faculties, but also grave matters which have doctrinal and other implications which affect the life of the Church. Archbishop Pell said to me that he was taking the matter to the Congregation for Doctrine and would go to the Holy Father if necessary. It has to be remembered, of course, for a number of those years, Archbishop Pell was a member of that congregation, and therefore he knew the rigour with which the matters would be examined there. And the recommendation obviously went, as we described, to the Ordinaria and was recommended on to the Holy Father who made that decision.
Thank you. Now, can we turn to the case of Rubio? In paragraph 201 of your statement, you note there that he resigned as a priest and his faculties were withdrawn in 1996. However, you state that action should have been taken in relation to him in 1994 when the complaint was first made by Anthony Hurstback to the then Vicar General.
I do.
Now, what action should have been taken in 1994?
He should have been removed from ministry.
And why wasn't that action taken, to your knowledge?
I can't explain that. Monsignor Cudmore was wrong.
Now, if we can turn to tab 230. Now, this is in August 1996, and the then acting Vicar General effectively withdrew his faculties by that letter. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that action followed him being charged with 2 counts of indecent assault and entering a plea of guilty to those charges.
Correct.
Can you help us with why, in relation to Rubio, that he was permitted to celebrate Mass privately, but Glennon wasn't?
I think the view of the Archbishop of the time would have been, and I surmise, that with regard to Glennon, there was always a tendency to gather groups of people around him, and the Archbishop was concerned that really he would always push the boundaries, and I think that was the point.
I see. Now, by November 1996, you were in the position of Vicar General.
Yes.
And you sought advice from the then independent commissioner concerning whether or not limited faculty should be granted to Rubio to enable him to act as a supply priest. Now, can you help us with why you sought the independent commissioner's advice rather than exercising your own discretion?
From what I remember, the sequence of events was this, that Archbishop Pell was appointed on the 16th of July, took possession on the 16th of August. A few days later, you'll notice that letter from Father Waters removing his faculties. Rubio, I think, undertook some counselling and was tending to push the boundaries and wanting to say, well, can I do this? Can I perhaps not have a permanent appointment but do a little bit of this? I referred the matter to the independent commissioner because it has been our invariable practice to do so, and I was not surprised by O'Callaghan's response.
No, he
so
said
in
no.
other words, I followed our procedure.
And he said no.
He said no.
Thank you. Now, he then resigned in April 1997 from any canonical office that he may still have held.
Correct.
Now, you then say that you reviewed his position in around 2010. What was it that caused you to review his position then?
I was reviewing the situation of a number of people who'd gone off into the wilderness, and Rubio was there without any faculties, and I felt that it was important to refer the matter to Rome to make sure that they were informed about his convictions and offences, and to send to them the copy of any court decision. And I did that.
But that court decision was as far back as in the 90s, was it not?
97.
Again, I think the issue probably was that in 2010, Pope Benedict XVI made it even easier for the bishop in these serious matters to refer the matter to Rome, and I wish to take advantage of that ease.
But wasn't it the case that in 2001 it was also made substantially easier?
Yeah, correct, yes, but it was made even easier still because these matters were put amongst the most serious of crimes, and we really felt that despite his protestations that we needed to do something about it vis-à-vis Rome.
Why wasn't it done when it was made easier in 2001?
I think in view of the number of things that happened, we took time.
I'm sorry? In view
of all the work that we had, and there were a number of these cases and we were processing them in turn.
So you're not suggesting that you were processing them in turn from 2001 and you got to Rubio in 2010?
I was suggesting that gradually after 2001 there were matters that we were processing, and I was keen to make sure by 2010 that everything that we had dealt with would be sent to Rome, so it would be quite clear.
The material that we asked you to look at overnight, Archbishop, will help us to understand the timing in respect of all of the people who have been laicized I take it that's right?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Now, just to complete the documents that I've put in front of you, on the 2nd of September 2011, there is a response from, let's just say, Rome for the moment, in relation to the matter being sent to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And then the document behind that is a reduced version of the preliminary investigation. And what you have is the index and the early documents indicating the assignments of the priest, and then the conclusion or report of the auditor, which begins on page 73.
Yes.
Now, that is an indication of the material that needed to be put together in order to make such an application to Rome.
And that's a typical case.
Yes, thank you. Now, attend to that bundle of documents.
Yes. The bundle will become Exhibit 16-20.
Thank you. Archbishop, I wanted to turn to the issue of the apologies that are issued as part of the Melbourne response. And you deal with this in paragraph 55 of your statement. Now, you say there that they're an important part of the Melbourne response. However, you say it's an unavoidable consequence of the independent nature and its protection of confidentiality that your knowledge of details is limited to what's contained in the recommendation of the compensation panel. Now, the effect of that is that the apology that you issued is inevitably generic in nature.
I'm sensitive to that because all I receive from the Independent Commissioner is his decision that Father X did that, and the recommendation from the compensation panel that this victim has been compensated. Now, because the matters are independent and because the engagements with the person who suffered are confidential, both the Independent Commissioner and the compensation panel feel constrained to respect that confidentiality. Now, that has the undesirable effect upon me when I write a letter of apology, is that I can only refer to the suffering that they've undertaken for the burden that it may be on in fairly general terms. I do read all those letters, and my apology is sincere and nonetheless. More recently, when this...
Can I just stop you
Sure.
before you come to more
Yes.
recently? You accept that the letters were identical, save for the identity of the priest and the victim?
They're very, very similar, at least. Some of them may be identical.
You don't write an apology letter from scratch for each person. You have a form letter because, as you've indicated, you didn't know anything of a more detailed nature, and presumably your secretary or some other person puts in the names of the victim and the priest.
Well, I mean, they're prepared in the Vicar General's office for me to sign. I always read them carefully, and for me it's an important way of my saying how I am shocked by what has happened, how I share in their pain, but there are limitations about what I can do.
Now, you say that recently you've sought to address this issue. Can you tell us when?
I would say just in the last 12 months or so. We've sought to try and get some minimal information which wouldn't be a violation of confidence, that might try and take away the pain that a person who suffered might feel if they feel they're just being fobbed up. That was never my intention, and if that happened, I certainly would apologise for it.
So it's the case that between 2001, when you've been responsible for signing those letters, and 2013, it wasn't brought to your attention, or you didn't consider whether or not the nature of the apology could be more personalised?
The letters were, in that period of time, were basically very similar. It was never indicated to me that this was unhelpful. Had it been, I would certainly have acted sooner. And
you're satisfied that the way in which you obtain information to personalise the apology is such that the independence, as you've indicated, of the components of the Melbourne response is not infringed?
I am.
And there's been no change in respect of that. That could have been done earlier, I take it, without impinging.
Of course.
Perhaps if we could just have a look at tab 138, which is one of those letters. So this is the letter that was sent in August 1998 to the Fosters. And this is where the paragraph that there's been questions asked before in relation to the reference to strenuously defending.
Correctly, and I understand that evidence, yes, and how that's been altered.
Removed.
Yes.
And then if we just continue over to the second page. And keep continuing down to the next page, and then the attachment. So this is the letter of apology.
It's the same format as that sent.
Continue down.
Exactly the same.
And it's signed by the then Archbishop.
Yes.
And apologises to them and those around them for the wrongs and hurts they'd suffered at the hands of Father Kevin O'Donnell. Now, then if we can have up tab 250. This is the apology that Mr Hirschbach received in November 2006. If we can continue down. And you see that's in the same terms as the earlier apology.
Yes.
And then perhaps if we can have 284, and this is the apology in respect of Mr AFA in June 2011, if we can scroll down, and we can see that's in the same terms as well.
Yep.
But you say from now on, the apologies are of a more personalised nature, are they?
Yes.
And who writes them?
Normally they are prepared in the Vicar General's office. Obviously, we're given information by Richard Leader as to what might be able to be said.
So does the lawyer give you a draft apology?
They help in the apology, they help with the letter, but I make the letter my own.
You alter the draft that you've given, do you?
If I see fit.
Have you seen fit?
Not as far as I remember, but you know, I'd always look and say, how does this express, within the limits of what we know, what we want to try and say.
Thank you.
And of course, these are situations where words are really inadequate.
Sorry,
well, to express it, you know, to try and address the awful suffering that people have had.
Now, just finally, turning to, again, the submission that was lodged with the Victorian inquiry, and if we can have paragraph 115 up on the screen of your statement. Now, you note there that that is the Church, identified reforms as part of the Victorian inquiry process.
Correct.
And one was to strengthen the working with children check system. Now, just dealing with that one firstly, how did you seek to achieve that strengthening?
Well, we would believe that, as we do now, that the working with children check extends now further than it did then. Normally, priests and various mandated people had a working with children check. Now it applies to all church workers if people work as volunteers in parishes. In other words, that the requirements are strengthened and the indications that people are needed to give in order to achieve a working with children check could be more searching.
So is it the case that the range of people covered by it was
much greater? Much greater.
And the details that were sought from those people?
Are more, as I understand it.
Now, you then refer to clarify and extend the limitation period for legal claims against the church.
Perhaps you might excuse my legal ignorance. I think the limitation period in these cases is quite short, and we led either an extension of time to what applies in current Victorian law to if a parent offended, so I think it's a 20 or 25-year extension, or to remove the extension altogether. But we realise, of course, that there are difficulties with that because people are dead and you can't get evidence.
Now, then, thirdly, to consider statutory oversight of the Towards Healing and Melbourne response processes.
I think that would provide us with the objectivity that these processes and processes by other churches, other bodies, other institutions in the state would all have the same standard of oversight and therefore would meet appropriate criteria.
So not limited to Towards Healing and Melbourne response, statutory oversight of institutions in relation to those who may have a record of or engagement with children.
Yes, but also the oversight of the way institutions handle with complaints such as these.
So the complaint handling process.
Yeah. The process, it's oversight of the process, I understand.
Now, those matters you identified during the course of the inquiry. Prior to it, you had identified mandatory reporting by ministers of religion?
Correct.
And that excludes the confessional?
It does.
Why is that?
The confessional, and I might add that in the reform of the Victorian law, the Victorian government did that. The confessional is seen as one of the fundamental exercises of religion, which is recognised in our constitution. It is seen as an encounter with God, where the priest is there simply to act as God's representative in giving forgiveness. Now, if a person goes to confession, there's always a purpose of amendment, and there always is a requirement that a person not only demonstrate sorrow, but demonstrate that they will make up for what they're doing. I don't have jurisdiction over the confessional. That is worldwide and absolute, and the Catholic Church does not have a position to change that. I do make the point that if that were to be swept away, and I don't believe that it can be, the possibility of offenders confessing is completely gone. They just wouldn't go. In the present situation, it may be the last opportunity that an offender has to face the reality of his or her offences, to be led by the priest either to give themselves up or to report and confront the enormity of their crimes.
So you see it as an opportunity for the priest, were he so minded, to seek to persuade the offender, notwithstanding the secret nature of the confessional, to go and report himself to the public.
I would see that. I would see that as a valuable opportunity, because if the person in going to confession has at least shown that amount of good to admit that they've done wrong, well then, if the priest can lead them to the consequences of that, well, that will be a benefit not only for the person who's coming to confession, but for society, and would help us in the protection of children, which is a very, very high objective.
Do you know if it's ever happened, Archbishop?
I wouldn't, of course, because priests have the secrecy of the confessional is something which priests hold very close and don't talk about, and that's by the understanding of the nature of the confessional. So I have to say no, I don't know that it's happened. I don't know that it hasn't happened either.
Thank you, Archbishop. I have nothing further.
Archbishop, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm singling out the Catholic Church.
Oh, I
I
understand.
want to talk to you about the Catholic Church. If we think of the Catholic Church in Australia as comprising the diocese and the religious orders, the whole, and we reflect on what we now know in other parts of the world, do you accept that it's apparent that there has been a problem with the abuse of children by ordained persons in the Catholic
Absolutely.
Church? And do you accept that we must assume that those problems are not just a period in time, but must go back in time?
I think the statistics that I know of, and my knowledge is limited, show that there has been a peaking at a particular time in the 60s, 70s and 80s. But from what research we have in this country, there has been some, going back for 80 years that we've been able to research.
Well, that's a peak in reporting, isn't it?
Yes.
But your knowledge from within inside the church, does it suggest that the phenomenon of reporting as opposed to the event occurring is one which may have peaked in the 60s, 70s and 80s, but that's not a reflection of what was actually happening before?
When we speak of reporting, we speak of matters that occurred in the 60s, 70s and 80s that are now reported much later. Yeah.
Those that occurred before may well be, of course, abuse of people who have since died.
That's possible.
And do you accept that there has been a greater recognition of the need to report and an acceptance of reports by the Church in the period you're talking about?
I would certainly believe so, and we're quite determined to keep on going.
Yeah. Now, some senior Catholic people have told us of the assumption in former times that the abuse of a child was a moral failing and not a matter for the criminal law. Do you share that view?
I don't subscribe to that view in any way, shape or form.
You've heard it said though, haven't you?
I've heard it alleged, yes.
And was it your experience in former times that the Catholic, or many Catholic people, or ordained people, saw it as a moral rather than a criminal issue?
I would see that people sometimes had a greater deal of sympathy for a church person than they should have, and they didn't sufficiently identify the crime that that person had committed for what it was. And I think these times have made us see quite clearly, both in what we think and know, but also in our action, what we must do.
The suggestion that in former times the matter was seen as a moral failure rather than a criminal act carries with it the suggestion that the issue may have been differently managed by the Church in former times. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I would have to admit that with what we've been doing now shows that there was too much of a tendency to minimise the seriousness of the matter, and I repudiate that totally.
When you say there was too much of a tendency, what are you saying was happening?
I would say that these crimes occurred to some degree, and that direct and serious enough action was not taken.
Are you talking about action here in Australia or action elsewhere?
Well, I have to speak with my experience here in Australia.
So your experience is that insufficient action was taken here in Australia?
I have to, from what we've seen and what we've sought to address.
Now, I've asked some of your colleagues with senior roles this question, and I'd like to know your thoughts on it. And that is the question of why. Can you help us with your perspective on why it is that the Church in Australia and elsewhere has experienced these significant issues?
I think in the Church and in the way we train people from the Church, we give them high ideals, we equip them with skills to serve and look for people. Our whole attitude is to look on people as Jesus Christ did. We don't always achieve that high level. I think the why is that some people have neglected the matters that support what they're doing. I'm a celibate, I'm not married. I need to have a link to God in prayer. I need to have a balance in my life of proper friendships with other people. I need to have proper relationships with people. Now, if any of those things fall aside, then you have a situation where wrong attitudes, minimisation can develop. And my experience in dealing with these unfortunate matters has been that almost universally what a priest should be doing in terms of prayer and reflection on Scripture, keeping himself focused on who he is and what he does, is being neglected, or that relationships with people, there's not a balanced relationship with a group of people, and a person becomes isolated, so that they seek out situations which are plain wrong, and they minimise the consequences of that.
Is the problem, as you said, in the people who are chosen, or the training of those people, or the later supervision of those people? Where would you look to source the problem and deal with it?
In past times, I would have looked, at beefing up the training, the awareness. Now I'm I know what I do for my students for the priesthood. There's careful assessment, not only medical and psychological, but also with senior priests. There's regular instruction in human formation. When young people go to a parish to work as students, there's always a review group, including women, who looks at how they interact with people. And I think that we have a much better chance now of knowing what we're dealing with, of knowing that they're appropriately supervised, and then of making sure that those who aren't suitable don't get forward to be ordained or to make religious profession. But we've got to keep working on it, and we've got to make sure that the professional sciences and our own work, our own spiritual work hand in hand, and that they go on. More recently, I think we have regular gatherings of priests. I had 135 priests down at Torquay about a month ago for a seminar and reflection and time together. And I think all of those things help priests who are working hard and doing very dedicated work in many parishes to realise that they're part of a family, to realise that all parts of their psyche, whether it's their spiritual needs, whether it's their human needs, whether it's their needs for friendship, whether it's the balance between work and leisure, are all kept in the proper focus.
There are some who've accepted that the issue of celibacy needs to be looked at in this context. What's your view about that?
Celibacy in the Western Church is part of the discipline of the priesthood. I believe that celibacy, supported by prayer, supported by all those other things that I've said, and I won't repeat them, is a wonderful vocation and a wonderful engagement with people. And I've been fortunate to have a very fulfilled life as a priest in a parishes, dealing with people in our marriage tribunal, people who suffer and so on, wherever I've been, I think that what we need to make sure is that if people coming to priesthood understand that celibacy is an embracing of the broad needs of people and an engagement with a broad cross-section of people. Once it becomes limited, or once it becomes turned in upon itself, then there is a danger. But celibacy rightly lived and prepared for with proper formation, I do believe has a valid function. And I would instance in society that there are many people in the professions, in the caring professions, in the law, and so on, who dedicate themselves to the life of that profession, and they can do remarkable things in society. And so too, we, like them, believe there is value in the way we do it.
The sense I have from what you say is that you accept that requiring celibacy imposes particular needs upon the selection, training and supervision
Correct.
of religious and priests. Is that
Correct.
right? And I get the impression that from what you're saying, that it's your view, but you tell me, that those particular needs weren't adequately recognised previously. Is that right?
I've had sufficient experience with people who found celibacy a burden and have asked the Pope to dispense them from priesthood. But on the other hand, I have a much wider experience of people living a celibate life as priests and finding it fulfilling. So I think it's an ongoing process, both in preparing people for priesthood and for religious life, but also in the way it's lived, and then being sufficiently flexible and honest enough for people to recognise that if they're in difficulties, that there are possibilities of re-looking at their life.
My question was directed to understanding your view as to whether or not previously there was adequate recognition of the need to select, train and supervise, acknowledging that it was a celibate life.
I think the means were taken were much simpler. What we do now, I think, is much clearer and will produce a much better and reliable effect. So I have some hesitations about the limitations in former times.
Now, we've been told by the Christian Brothers that there are virtually no persons in Australia, no men in Australia, offering themselves to be trained as brothers in Australia, and they're drawing upon training from other trained people from other parts of the world. You've probably had many discussions about these issues with your colleagues, is that right?
In a general way, I wouldn't have discussed the Christian Brothers, but I'm aware that some religious orders are not getting the number of candidates, and I think that can be put down to a number of factors, to the way in which their order has evolved, the way in which the charism of the order is fulfilled, other factors relating to our society and the way people grow up and so on.
What's happening in your diocese? A young...
In my diocese, I will ordain 6 priests this year, and I'll ordain 7 deacons who will be priests next year. I have 36 students for the priesthood for Melbourne in our seminary here, and 4 in Rome, and a number of priests doing postgraduate studies.
And is that the type of numbers that have been consistent over recent decades, or?
I would say certainly since 1996, good numbers like that, yes.
And what was happening before 1996?
There was a decline when Cardinal Pell, when Archbishop Pell became the Archbishop. There were, I think, 11 students for the Archdiocese of Melbourne. So it was a difficult time, but things have picked up since that.
Are you drawing upon priests who've been trained outside of Australia?
In my seminary, I have people of various nationalities but who are trained here. In addition to the seminarians, because Melbourne is such a multicultural city, I have brought a number of priests from other countries who work among their communities and with whom we work to prepare very, very strongly in cultural factors, speech modification, adjustment to, this is Australia, attitudes to women and so on. We do a pretty strong formation with anyone who comes from overseas to try and make sure that they are integrated with the people in our parishes and will work adequately with them. By and large, we've done pretty well, with about 3 startling failures where I've had to say, well, look, I'm sorry, this is not working for you and it's not working for us, and you might return. But we're very grateful for the real energy and real goodness of some priests who've joined us from overseas.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I do have some questions, Your Honour.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Perhaps you can go first.
Thank you. Sir, my name is Cash and I appear on behalf of the witness, the victim in these proceedings, Paul Hurstbach.
Yes.
Just, if I may, just picking up from a topic that His Honour was just addressing, and namely the topic of celibacy. We know from the materials that have just been tendered, that is the bundle of documents which is Exhibit 1620. If we have that up on screen, please, and in particular page 73, that is the third last document. Got it up on screen at the moment, and if we scroll down to the middle of that page, we can see in this report of the auditor to yourself, dated the 30th of August 2011, it described, doesn't it, Father Rubio's background and how it was that there was an, quote, original matter that concerned the police was an allegation of rape of an adult woman in the mid-1980s. So we know that there was this allegation in relation to Father Rubio of his interest in relation to a female, an adult female, don't we?
Yes.
And it goes on, this was investigated by the police and by the Commission into Sexual Abuse and was found to be a consensual sexual relationship, as had been admitted by Father Rubio. So it's clear that in retrospect, this particular priest, he would seem to have needed an outlet for his sexuality, didn't he, to engage in sexual activity.
Well, he did engage in sexual activity. We'll agree on that.
And you've told us, haven't you, that celibacy, from your perspective as a Catholic priest, is a wonderful thing, and it's been something which has been fine for yourself, haven't you?
Correct. But
you would have to accept, wouldn't you, that given the experience of Father Rubio, that experience isn't a good thing for all priests, is it? It would seem.
I'm not prepared to generalise, but I did say earlier in my evidence, Your Honour, that I've found that some priests struggle with it, and it's good if help can be given to them so if they realise it's not for them. But I do believe wholeheartedly in the value of celibacy for the priesthood, because it is a being available for people, a broader kind of love. It's a very high ideal, and not everyone attains to it, but it's very, very worthwhile.
Isn't it? Doesn't experience show that, although it's a high ideal, that it's an impractical ideal?
I don't think so.
it's really unachievable, isn't it, to expect all priests, in light of our experiences, to be celibate?
I don't think so.
It goes on at the bottom of that page, further allegations of sexual harassment in the mid-1990s were made by another woman in 1997. So, as to whether they were made out or not, leaving that aside, there's an allegation that he's had involvement with an adult woman, hasn't there been?
Well, I mean, that's indicated clearly there. I have no problem about that.
If that's the case, appreciating as we do that the conduct that we're inquiring into is the institutional responses in relation to child sexual abuse, it's evident in this context that this was a priest who's engaged in child sexual abuse, but who nevertheless would seem to have desired an outlet for his sexuality amongst adults. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
And has the Church perhaps given consideration to how it is that if priests were permitted to have this sexual outlet, this non-celibate condition, that priests would be less inclined to perhaps interfere with other people?
I don't necessarily accept that. I can see, you're making a legitimate point about a particular person's weaknesses and how that affects others. I think that the matter can be addressed, number one, through all I've said about proper preparation and discernment and assessment, and about proper support, but also with compassion for those priests who struggle. So I think the goal and the vision is important and effective, and I believe in it. But we're dealing with human people, and we have to sort of recognise where someone's in difficulties.
Do you not think that perhaps the Commission, or at least the Church, would be assisted by the professional opinion of an expert in human behaviour, a psychologist or whatever, who might be able to give us insight into how it is that if a human being has a sexual outlet, has sexual activity with an adult, consensually, that might alleviate a desire to engage in other sexual activity, namely with children.
I wouldn't take your premise too far, because it's a premise based on a principle that I don't accept, that everyone has to have a sexual outlet.
Yes.
And I don't accept that principle. What I've tried to say is that the whole question of celibacy in the Western Church is a matter of universal church discipline, and I'm happy about it, but I can't do anything about it. It is a matter for the universal church, and that therefore your suggestion of the expert help, I think it's important to listen to what, and I think it's important to listen again and again to what are the signs, to what help might be given to people, how things might be better discerned, and then also how, not only in the priesthood but in other aspects of society, how people might live their lives with integrity, because this kind of behaviour can't mean that a person is integrated and happy, and I think that you make a good point there.
You say how it is that you don't accept that everyone needs a sexual outlet, but without labouring the point, doesn't this documentation suggest that it's evident that at least Father Rubio certainly would appear to have needed this in his life?
I think I've made that point already, haven't I?
So, I might take you to tab 250, if I may, and the letter of apology that you wrote to Mr Hirschbach on the 10th of November 2006, and I don't know whether you're familiar with the evidence that he gave, Archbishop, but although the wording of the apology is, and you've accepted in effect that it's somewhat generic,
I have.
He said that nevertheless he accepted, and you'll be pleased to know this, that it was well intentioned.
Absolutely.
And indeed it was, wasn't it? It was meant
Absolutely, and you know, it gave me some pain that it did cause hurt to Mr. Herzbach, and I apologise for that.
And he accepts that, of course. What you were trying to do, the gist of what you were trying to do, was to convey, I suppose, true, genuine contrition.
Correct.
And you expressed it in terms of on your behalf and on behalf of the Catholic Church, didn't you? And what you were trying to convey, correct me if I'm wrong, in light of your evidence, is that you and the Church were really interested in justice, charity and compassion.
Correct.
The apology presumably stemmed from something Cardinal Pell told us about, namely an acceptance of moral responsibility for the acts committed by the officials of the Catholic Church. That'd be right, wouldn't it?
I mentioned earlier that our situation is that in the Church we look at things out of justice and charity, and where one in the Church is hurt, the whole of the Church suffers, and therefore from that justice and charity and compassion there is a realisation that the Church is weakened by these acts and more weakened by that suffering.
Archbishop, Cardinal Pell told us that the principal concern of the Church in terms of the Melbourne response was for the victims of the sexual abuse. And I take it that that's still the case?
Correct.
And presumably, if that's still the case, the Church is prepared to take what reasonable steps there might be in order to reduce the impact of any sexual abuse upon the victims.
Yes, and I think what we've seen in evidence about the workings of CareLink, over and above the medical things, accompanying people, running messages, doing things like that, is indicative of that.
And with that in mind, I'd like to take you, only briefly if I may, to what Mr Herzbach said in relation to the deeds of release, or the particular deed and release in relation to him. What he said about the deed of release that he and other victims have signed and are still bound by. He said that initially signing the deed of release helped him emotionally, and indeed, no doubt that was one of the things that you had in mind. You wanted this document to assist them emotionally, the victims.
Yes.
However, having signed the deed of release, he told us in evidence about how it causes him angst. You may not have anticipated that angst.
No.
He said that the Catholic Church has taken so much from me over the years. I feel like the Church has exerted complete control over my life. I find it ironic that at the point where I finally wrested that control back, I signed a document giving up my rights and putting myself under its control. And you can sort of understand that thinking, can't you?
Yes, yes, certainly.
And it was never intended.
No, that was never intended. It was intended in the other way that you explained.
And so in his statement he says as follows, he says, quote, "I want the Church to acknowledge that the deeds of release signed by the victims through the Melbourne response may add to a victim's burden and exacerbate the very problem that they were designed to alleviate. And I take it in view of the evidence that you've given that you're prepared to make that acknowledgement."
Correct.
So he went on to explain in his evidence that the signing over of his rights to the Catholic Church once again meant that he was in effect controlled by it, and he effectively said he'd come full circle. In his statement he said that it would mean a great deal to him and would help in the healing process if the Catholic Church would, quote, "demonstrate its compassionate response by releasing those victims from their obligations under the deeds." And in evidence he said that it would have a great deal of beneficial effect on the lives of victims if the Catholic Church was to set aside the restriction under the deed in relation to the ability to sue the Church. He said it would be an indication of their compassion towards victims to release them from those deeds and would address the need for the response of the Church to be truly genuine. In light of all of that, in light of that evidence, it's fair to say that if the church was to, in effect, set aside the restriction under the deed in relation to the ability to sue the church that relates to at least Mr Hurstbach, to do that, you'd have to accept, wouldn't you, as a reasonable proposition that that would indeed be an indication that the church is truly interested in justice, charity and compassion, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
And so that would be the honourable thing to do, wouldn't it?
I've said that these are among the matters we'll consider, and I'm happy to leave it there.
I know you're considering it, but it'd be the honourable thing to do, wouldn't it?
I'm saying we're considering it, and I'm not wanting to escape.
Doesn't one follow the other, sir?
Being urged to consider it in a hurry, Archbishop.
Thank you, Your Honour.
How much longer do you think you'll be?
Only a couple of minutes, Your Honour.
Right. Do others have questions?
Yes, Your Honour.
How long?
10 minutes, John.
No, Your Honour.
At this stage, I don't think so, Your Honour.
No, Your Honour.
No. We might take the short adjournment for about a quarter of an hour. That means we'll finish before 12:30. We'll adjourn.